How many things can you see that are wrong with this engine bay? Let's just look at this project and see all the unfinished stuff. First of all, we have a master cylinder that is definitely not connected to the brake lines. Looks like maybe it's been bench bled with these extra tubing, extra lines coming out of it. Then we have an LS engine that obviously has no coil packs on it. The intake manifold is not bolted down. There's no throttle body. There's no balancer if you look down at the front of the engine. If we wheel around here, we see there's no radiator in place, no fan of any kind. And over on the other side, we can see that there's an AC compressor that's not fully bolted on, and there are some air conditioning hoses and lines that are just mocked up and not actually bolted in place. And then down here we can see a classic mistake where there's a painted part, this spring tower for a custom suspension, that's been brutally hacked with an angle grinder to make room for the steering shaft that connects the column with the rack and pinion. Do you see anything else? I think that's probably enough. Have you ever had an experience when you come out to your garage on maybe a Saturday morning and you take a look around at an engine bay like the one we just looked at and think, I don't know where to start with this. There are too many things going on here, and sometimes you just give up and walk away. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. It happens to me every once in a while. So in putting projects like this together, I've been building hot rods for more than 50 years, and every once in a while I get stuck. I find some kind of roadblock, and it's not because I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the tools. I got lots of tools. I've got a TIG welder, a MIG welder, a plasma cutter, 2 or 3 drill presses, probably a dozen angle grinders, and lots of other things. And yet, that doesn't seem to help me move forward on a project like this. Possibly the most important tool I have that can help me with this, and I have to remember to actually use it myself, is a 3-ring binder with the name of the project on the front and a bunch of tabs inside to tell me that, okay, here's the stuff we should be doing on brakes and exhaust and wiring and cooling and ignition and fuel and driveline and so forth. And actually, this one is not as filled out as much as this one is, because this happens to be a separate 3-ring binder just focused on the front suspension on this C10 project. That's what prompted this whole project to begin with. Was I had an idea for an aftermarket suspension that would use GMT 800 steering, brake, and suspension parts on a custom crossmember. So that's what started all this. And then along the way, we figured out that we could be using this as a test mule for other things, like the air conditioning hoses that I just pointed out. Can we make some custom hoses for C10 trucks, square body trucks, the same way we did for OBS trucks? And when I say we, I mean Quick Performance. I happen to be one of the owners, along with my son Robert, one of the owners of Quick Performance. And we make front accessory drives for Chevrolet engines, LS, big block, small block, Gen 5, all of that sort of thing. And so this is kind of a personal project, the suspension part, and then obviously we're using it as a company project as well. So we get stuck sometimes, or we get distracted because I really want to do the air conditioning hoses before we move on to other things. And for example, right now on the front of this truck, this is an 81 truck, but the front clip is actually a 73 to 80, which of course I discovered they don't actually fit very well, but it's close enough for us to do the mock-up because the core support and the condenser and where the lines come through and so forth are different on the 73 to 80s than it is on the 81 to 87. So this is a case where setting priorities, doing first things first, is part of what a binder like this can help with, because you start to realize the interdependencies of one thing versus another. So you can't do a drive shaft until you've got an engine and transmission in place. You can't do the exhaust until the engine is in place. You can't do fans, perhaps, until you decide what water pump and balancer you're going to use. So those kinds of roadblocks show up every once in a while, and a binder with those tabs and maybe an overall plan for what needs to be done first. What do I have to do before I can do something else? So that's where having a plan and some place to keep track of that plan and keep track of your progress is a really important tool in moving a project like this forward. So I'm going to talk about some other things that I've learned over the years. And part of this video is actually for my benefit as much as it is for yours, because I had part of this binder put together, but not very well organized. And so thinking about making this video was the thing that prompted me to, okay, let's get back and figure out which of these things in this engine bay need to be done first. Well, right now, obviously, we're working on the air conditioning system, where the compressor is going to be and the lines that we're going to use to hook up to that. So that takes precedence over anything else, but there are some other things I can be doing in the meantime. For example, there's nothing that keeps me from getting these brake lines hooked back up to the new master cylinder. And then obviously I need to run some new lines from the new style hoses that are on the spindles and control arms and calipers that I'm using on this project, and get that hooked up to the combination valve. So follow along and we'll see if together we can figure out some of the tools that we can use to keep projects on track, and maybe even use some, I hate to use this word, corporate project management techniques or principles to help us with our own hot rod projects. And I promise we won't get bogged down in a lot of corporate speak, but there can be techniques and tools out of some of that high-level corporate kind of stuff that we can use on a day-to-day basis on our hot rod projects. So let's get started on that together. I think one of the very first things we need to get clear about when we sit down to think about a new project, or even move forward on a project we've already started, is what project management systems would call the scope of the project. Or my way of thinking about it is, so what's the dream? Is it a show level truck or car that you want to be able to, that you might even trailer to a show and show it off to people? Is it just more like a daily driver or a weekend cruiser? Is it maybe a street strip combination? Or is it just a beater that you're just trying to get together to be able to go to a show and sort of sit on the back row and still have fun going to the show, but you don't really care about what it looks like to people? So being clear about that, about what the scope is, I think is really important. So for example, the C10 that we've just looked at, I mentioned that it was originally, I bought it just because I wanted a test mule for the suspension idea I'd been working on. Well, some work had already been done on the truck. Front fenders had been replaced with aftermarket fenders. Doors from two different C10s had been attached to it. Two different bedsides, a different tailgate with a different color. So we've affectionately called it patches. The cab corners and the rockers had already been replaced, welded but not finished yet. Still some gaps in the floorboards between the rockers and the floorboards. So I've been doing some work on that. So it is not a showpiece. Matter of fact, I think it may get more attention in its current form than it would be if we put some kind of half-assed paint job on it. So we affectionately call it patches because of all of those variations in color. But it functionally will do what we want it to do, which is or what I want to do, which is to be a test bed for this suspension idea. So it's got to be running and driving. And I want to do the rest of that absolutely as simple as possible. So, and probably on as low a budget as possible. So I happen to have a couple of things laying around the shop that I'd accumulated in trades or swap meets or whatever. One was a 4.8 liter LS truck engine. Those are not the most desirable truck engine, so I picked it up pretty inexpensively. I also happened to have, I'd traded for somehow a built turbo 350 transmission. And so I thought, well, maybe this is a simple combination. Um, and if I put a carburetor on the LS engine instead of a fuel injection system, I don't have to worry about a fancy wiring harness and programming and those kinds of things. Now, I've done all that in the past. I've used stock and modified the stock harness myself. Had somebody then program it. I've used the Terminator X and tried to do some of my own tuning. And so all of those things I've had experience with. I've never had a carbureted LS engine in a vehicle. We have one here in the shop as a test engine because that way the fuel and the battery system cart that we have, we can put on a big block or a small block or an LS engine, and we don't have to have a high pressure system for a test engine. So keeping it simple with the carburetor and the turbo 350 transmission, that was part of the thing of one of the requirements, part of the scope of the project, if you will. So that's being clear about that and not getting carried away with all kinds of fancy stuff. So, for example, one more item, obviously, since we're in the front accessory drive business and we are a vintage air dealer, you would think, well, this truck has to have a vintage air system. Well, it already has. It was a non-factory air truck to begin with, so it already has a heater, and it's a good heater. The blower motor works. The heater core is in good shape. So maybe we just put an under dash unit. Remember those? And some of you are old enough to remember when cars didn't come with factory air, and so you went to you bought an aftermarket unit, and it was just this thing that hung under the dash, sat there right there on top of the transmission tunnel. Well, Vintage Air still makes that sort of. It's the equivalent of the old Mark IV air conditioning system. So maybe, in the spirit of simplicity, we just park that under there, and we don't have to worry about any other ductwork and controls and that sort of thing because it's all just in one unit. We haven't decided about that yet. But that's an example of really thinking about what do you want this project to be? What's the overall scope? What is the dream? And make sure you write that down, because we all know the problem with the slippery slope of, well, while we're in there, why don't we go ahead and do that next thing? And so having it written down can be a control on that and not let the budget get away and not let the complexity get away, and then stalling the whole project because you were headed in a direction that you weren't able to do because of time constraints or budget constraints or perhaps talent constraints. Who knows? So then other things like figuring out what the roadblocks are. The sometimes project management people will talk about a critical path where this has to be done before this gets done and those kinds of things. So, for example, if it is going to be a show vehicle, then there's some things you need to do to bolt everything together, do all of the hole drilling and modifying things that you possibly can before it goes to the paint shop. So, for example, like in the engine bay we were looking at, I had already painted part of the new front suspension because I thought that the shaft coming out of the rack going up to the steering column was going to go over the top of that. Well, it turns out it didn't, so now I had to hack up something that was already painted. Well, in my case, it's a prototype anyway, so I'm expecting for things to be hacked up and changed and drilled and modified. But if you were doing this for real and you had a powder coated front suspension, you don't want to be hacking that up because that's going to be very difficult to patch back together with some sort of color. So I think that's one of the very first things that we need to pay attention to in any project is getting really clear about what the goal is, what the dream is, and then sticking to that. I've got a couple of tips I thought I might share with you about keeping things on track, keeping your project moving forward. One is called the 15-minute Sunday night prep session, where you sit down for a few minutes and really think about what do I want to happen this coming week and what I want to get ready to do next Saturday. Let's say, assume Saturday is your main day for working on your project. So the reason for doing that on a Sunday night is maybe there's some parts you need to get ordered or pick up between now and Saturday, so you get that taken care of. And then maybe there's a lead time on some of those parts, and so if it's not Amazon delivering it the next day, it's somewhere down the road while you need to allow for that. So doing that planning on Sunday night can get you ready so you hit the ground running when it comes Saturday morning. One of the other things I think is really important is to take lots of photos during the whole process. And nowadays with cameras and phones, it's so easy, and you've got the phone with you all the time anyway. So there's some things that I take pictures of. For example, when I buy a part, sometimes I take a picture of the part, so I've got the part number, and I can print that out and stick it in a binder. And for me, that's easier to do that. I don't always print it out this big, but print it out, stick it in the binder, because sometimes stuff that gets photos that I take on my phone, I forget where they are, and I can't find them when I go back. So part numbers would be one thing, but also sometimes a certain way of doing something. Like this was putting together a Y pipe for my 48 Chevy pickup project, and I just wanted to be able to remember how I did that in case I want to do something like that again in the future. So that's one tip. Another tip is make a budget. Time budget, money budget. Then multiply the biggest number you can think of times 2, and then you might come somewhere close to what it's really going to be. So budgeting is always a hard thing to do, but it's good to think about that ahead of time. One of the other things is what some people would call having a clean exit. So let's say you finish up on Sunday night, you've been working on the project in the shop, in your garage, Sunday night. How about let's put all the tools away. Let's check and make sure that the 10mm socket is over here and somebody hasn't stolen that. One of my little secrets is, because other guys in the shop get to use these tools behind me, I have my own secret stash of 10mm sockets, because that's the one that's always missing. So I can go over and get my own 10mm socket. So anyway, a clean exit, having everything put away, cleaned up, ready to go. So once again, when you're ready to hit the ground, you're going to hit the ground running. So just a couple of tips that you might find useful. So next I thought I'd share a couple of tips I've learned along the way about how to help if you're fabricating a lot of your own parts. If you're making motor mounts or brackets of various kinds and that sort of thing, it's really good to do sometimes all it takes is just a simple sketch. And sometimes it's better if you have some actual dimensions on something. So get some graph paper, which has these this grid of, usually these are 1/4 of an inch, so 4 of those per inch. And then you can make an exact drawing to actual size. And I'll just share with you that I made an attempt to learn how to turn a hand drawing like this into a CAD drawing. I found a really supposedly simple CAD program, but it was still too complicated for me, and I'm too old to learn that new trick. So I happened to be sharing that information with a friend of mine who said, I've got a little simple CAD program. I can convert this into a drawing for you. I'll put that into a CAD program. And he also, it turns out, had a simple little laser engraver machine. And he showed me that he could turn something like this into something like this. This is very thin material, but it's a great pattern. It's a great way to see, does this actually fit? And do these, these tabs and slots, are they going to fit together? And so he now is upgrading his laser into something that will actually cut at least 3/16 material. So that's what I've been making the suspension parts out of, typically is 3/16. So we'll see if he can make me some parts in the future. But one of the little tips I wanted to share was I found these things I can't remember. It may have been in a drafting class I took in college, which would be 40s, 50s, long time ago. But this is a little ruler that lays down, and it has different kinds of scales on it. So, for example, if I wanted to take this full-size drawing of one of the side plates I was working on, and I wanted to convert that and put it on an 8.5 by 11, just so I'd have a record of it. I would know what the dimensions were, but it doesn't have to be full size. So what I could do is take a tape measure, look at this, it's about 17 inches long. So there are different scales along here. And so if I take a look at the 30 scale, let's say, it says 30 right there. 17 on the 30 scale would be about there. And so that doesn't really fill the page up. So let's go to the 20 scale. And here, 17 is about there. So that 17-inch part there would fit perfectly on an 8.5 by 11 sheet using the 20 scale. So I would measure all the dimensions and convert that and use a pencil to trace along, and that would be a way to have a scale drawing of that full-size drawing. One of the other little things is good to have besides this. I think sometimes these are called engineering scales or rulers, and sometimes this one's called an architect's ruler. And so it's a similar sort of thing. In this case, it will have 1/8 and 1/4 and 3/32 and fractions of inches, where this is going to be in whole numbers. But a little thing like this that you can pick up at the office supply store. That way you can draw circles. It's already got all kinds of different sizes, and so you can lay that down and draw your bolt holes and that sort of thing. So just a couple of tips on tools you can use to make drawings. So once again, either you can make a drawing that you can take to somebody and have them make parts, or it's just a way to have a record of what you did and created, and one more thing that you can stick in your binder and go back to if you ever need to make another part like that, or remind yourself exactly what you did. Well, I hope some of these tips and ideas might be something to be useful for you. As I mentioned early on, part of the reason for doing this video is for my own benefit as much as for yours, because I need to follow some of these tips and tricks and put things in binders and get organized and get my project back on track and make sure that things are going the way I want it to go. There's one more thing that I want to add about the benefit of having a binder like this. Is that I have a place back here for all the receipts, for all the expenses I'm incurring, and I'm going to have a page for when it's all finished and put together. There'll be things like what spark plugs did I use, what oil did I use, what's the oil capacity on the pan I'm using, and all those kinds of things. So you can have that as reference in case you need it. The other benefit of all this is that some of those kinds of things, maybe tips about if you did some custom wiring and if you've hidden a relay or a fuse or something someplace, you've got notes and maybe a diagram to help you remember where that is. So it can help later when you're driving your project. You've got this as a reference manual that you can pull out. But then someday, assuming that maybe you're ready to move on to another project and you want to leave this project to a family member, or you decide to sell the project, having this complete binder would add a lot of value to that project, either for your family member because they've got something that because they weren't there when you built this gives them the background they need, or if you're selling the project, it can add a lot of value to the buyer, where they now know that they can tap into the knowledge base that you put together in that binder. So I hope this has been of some help to you. I know it's going to be helpful to me to get my project back on track. And so if there's anything we can do, I'll have to do a little commercial here at the end. Obviously, Quick Performance, we're in the business of making serpentine drive systems for Chevrolet engines. And if there's anything we can do to help you with your project that has to do with any of that, obviously you can go to quickperf.com, or you can call the number that's going to be here on the screen someplace, and we'd love to help you out with that. But mainly, we wanted to share because we're hot rodders and we like to share our information and our knowledge with people, not only about our products, but about the whole building of hot rod kinds of projects. And so it gives us great satisfaction to be able to share that with you. And we'd love to hear your feedback. If you've got other tips and ideas, love to hear about it. You can put that down in the comments below, and look forward to seeing you again here at Quick Performance.